Hi, and welcome to episode 38 now of the ChessTDD series. I am at home with my normal recording setup. There's a fan going in here, so you might hear that. And also, my cat just wandered in. She seems pretty happy and affectionate and whatnot, so you might hear her make some noise. Hopefully not. We'll see. So, to start things off here, what I wanted to do is round out the basic piece-oriented features with bishop moves. So, as per the pattern I've been following, I'm deleting this stuff that's not strictly necessary, I think, for what I'm doing. There's a lesson to take away from that. In my own travels, in coaching, and in development, I found that there's a lot of value to be had in getting rid of stuff you have, whether in text files or code files or whatever, getting rid of things that you don't need. Things lying around like cruft that you don't fully understand has a way to come back to haunt you, even in seemingly innocuous ways, like maybe it's in there, and so the next time somebody comes along to implement the next feature, that person who's following the existing patterns in the code base thinks that it's necessary when it isn't. So that's not a huge deal, but it's a waste of time. So there are a lot of, in my opinion, compelling reasons to go as minimal as possible. It's nice of different applications to give you templates and like more information to follow. It's kind of a good user experience thing, I suppose, but unless I'm using it, I don't really want it in there. That applies to things like config files. I really try to keep all that stuff to a minimum whenever I can. So what I'm doing here, I had kind of flirted with combining the white and black bishops into a single scenario here, but I ultimately decided against it. So I want to say simplest thing here that I can do is have the white bishop and capture its movements. So to say this piece at 3-1, the white bishop should have the following moves. And then, having had so many instances where I was kind of burned by all the copy and paste, I think I made a point here of really typing things out by hand. It looks like I'm copying things in there now that I look at what I was doing, but I was just tabbing between rook and bishop moves for reference. So I wasn't copying and pasting and then undoing, just tabbing. So I'm typing this out by hand, and I've gone into this a number of times here before, the trade-offs that you face when copying and pasting. If I were to sort of have a code rush shortcut where I can hit, I think it's shift enter, and it duplicates the line a bunch of times. If I did that, I might go faster, but I might not. So there's an interesting thing that happened here that kind of belies my criticism of copy and paste. It's not compiling, and it took me a minute to figure out why. And that is because I brainlessly typed rook movement when I was referring to the rook movement feature. So I guess the lesson there is that copy and paste is a great way to do things brainlessly, but even if you're just hand typing, you can still do things brainlessly. So the lesson is maybe try not to do things brainlessly. I've been alive for 35 years, and I seem not to have quite learned that lesson yet. So maybe there's always a tendency to space out if you're not paying enough attention. Seek to correct that in myself, but incremental improvement is something I'll settle for. So what I was looking at before, trying to sort of mash into one feature that I decided to separate out, was let's do this with a black bishop as well. And that was something I picked up kind of partway through these features was, oh, well, it turns out I did a lot of stuff with just the white pieces in mind. So that's something, and I've actually implemented the code for like 3 of these episodes now in a row. I'm trying an experiment with batching a little bit. So here's a teaser. I know what comes up in the next couple of episodes. The lack of consideration of the black piece movement becomes apparent as I go back to some of the older features and functionality. But for bishop, it turns out to be all right. So this is the same deal. I'm just going to go through and type out the different moves that the black bishop should have. And this is an easy one to reason about as I go along, because I'm just doing either simultaneous increments or, increment, decrement. It's pretty easy once you get in the flow to just sort of type this out. And it's also not so tempting to copy and paste, since unlike something that's horizontal or vertical movement, I will be changing both numbers in there every time. But I like to think that I just kind of set myself on the virtuous non-copy and paste path and did it for those reasons. So next up, and following the same basic pattern of these features, is going to be, let's see what happens when we set up the first move of the game. And so what I would expect is that in the first chessboard, you've got these 4 bishops, and none of the bishops should be able to go anywhere. So that's going to be an easy enough test to type out by hand. I'll just say that the piece at, I think is 3-1. And there's something interesting I've learned about spec flow as I've done this. It seems like when I'm saying the piece at 3-1, if I've done that before in this feature file, it populates the same heading for this table. So it won't do it for 6-1 because I haven't done that one before. So I'm going to type this X and Y out by hand. But once I go to 6-8, 6-8, since I've done that one before, you'll see this again where it, or maybe it was 3-8. I don't know. Nope. 6-8. Let's see if I'm right. I don't actually remember that with 100% certainty, but I believe, even if I don't like tab enter, if I type it all out, I think I get the columns. Yeah, there we go. So that's a thing. I don't actually know a whole lot about it. I'm just kind of piecing that together through experience, but it's kind of interesting. Suppose that makes sense. Okay, so the next thing I believe I'm going to want to do is talk about the capture scenarios. So I'll set up a bishop and an empty board again, and then I'll put some other piece at the very end of its range of movement and verify that it's the same. And now here, I might be splitting hairs a little, but in doing something like that, and where I want the clarity of the visual, this is one place I don't necessarily mind the copy and paste. I don't view it as inferior because there's a gestalt. It's this exact same thing that I want as the outcome. I'm not duplicating knowledge because I'm doing it for the sake of clarity, and I'm not doing the kind of copy paste tweak that seems to always trip people up, where you're going to copy and paste and then you're going to go back through and manually edit things. That never seems to go very well. But in the scenario where I'm just, verbatim, for the sake of a visual example, taking the same thing, seems to be all right. Maybe weigh in the comments of the YouTube or the blog post if you have a difference of opinion. I'm certainly interested to hear that. One thing about this very visually oriented ATDD approach, or at least acceptance test rating approach, is that it's caused me to sort of explore the boundaries of where copying and pasting or information duplication might actually be appropriate, if not beneficial. So it's been kind of an interesting exercise. I know in code, nothing's changed for me that in like production code where there's not this desire for an element of visualization, I still consider knowledge duplication to be one of the biggest enemies, one of the biggest kind of anti-patterns you'll find yourself fighting against. All right, so what I'm going to do next here is the same thing I was doing with rook, and I'm going to surround the white bishop with enemy pieces. And then what I really want to be doing is verifying that a surrounded white bishop in its starting position can make the appropriate captures but not move beyond them. And then I'll want to go back and do that with a black bishop and white pieces. But I did something that you get to watch me flounder through here that was, fairly stupid. I'm trying to think whether I should give it away right now or let you see if you can figure out what dumb mental mistake I was making. Long and short of it is I was utterly convinced that there's a bug in the code. Right, so here I am. Okay. Why should the piece at 3-1 have 2 moves? I was expecting it not to have any as I was mousing over that. So where my brain immediately went to was, oh, it's another version of that. I got a little too clever for myself. It's another version of that thing that I hit before where if I was moving up and to the right, everything went well, but it wasn't figuring blocked out properly if I was moving back and to the left or something. So just so you understand as you're watching me do what I'm doing, I guess I've settled on maybe giving away the ending because there's no like grand unveil. I just stop being stupid at some point. So for some reason in my head, even though I was writing it out to match the rook's acceptance test of being surrounded by enemy pieces, like even though I actually typed surrounded by enemy pieces, my brain was reasoning about being surrounded by friendly pieces. So I was saying, oh, there shouldn't be any moves there. Why are there 2 moves? Well, the reason that there are 2 moves available is because those are enemy pieces. So I have 2 capture moves. It's actually exactly what I would have hoped for and expected in the acceptance test. But I got a little too, wrapped up in outsmarting myself and started to think immediately of what could be wrong instead of just stopping to think about whether I'd actually written the right test. So there's another lesson there too. Sometimes it makes sense to just pull back and kind of scratch your head for a minute and think about what you're actually testing and what your results actually look like. I sort of dove immediately into diagnosis and problem-solving mode, which, is somewhat defensible, I suppose, given that I had seen a very similar problem in a number of different situations, not to mention that I had solved it in the vertical and horizontal cases. So, hey, it stands to reason. I don't remember solving that in the diagonal case. And so I jumped in and did the same thing I had done with those other situations in previous episodes where I started to write tests that were unit tests instead of just the acceptance tests. And I started to think about, okay, what can I do to this method here to get it to like work properly? So I factored out, or I introduced a local variable, and then I said, let me try reversing the collection here if, say, the absolute, or the x direction is negative, and then I think that didn't work, so I tried it for positive, and maybe I tried it for y. You're going to watch me flounder around here a little bit. And for me, this is actually one of the traps you can fall into, because there's a great deal of freedom provided by having really high test coverage and through the TDD approach, which is you can form these like quick hypotheses and say, I think this might work. I haven't fully reasoned through the code yet, so I'll just kind of throw some things around and see if I can get green. Now, I don't view that as a bad approach. Or I wouldn't continuously do it. The thing you have to do if you're going to follow what I do in that sense, you have to be very disciplined about 2 things. Number one, if you don't get green after a bit, stop just trying random things. You'll wear yourself out and you probably won't get anywhere. And the other thing is, once you get green, you have to go and figure out why. You can't just get green by coincidence and then say, well, that works, moving on. You need to write some tests or go back and reason about the tests you've already written and understand why you got to green. So it's okay to kind of experiment and try things in the code to see whether you're red or green or what have you, but you just got to make sure that you go back and figure out why something works or doesn't work or what have you. So in that vein, I'm I'm at the point where I kind of backed out all that stuff I was doing and say, oh, okay, this is not actually working. I need to approach this from another perspective here. So I'm usually reluctant to do this, but eventually I kind of stumbled my way into the debugger and said, well, it'd sure be helpful to see what spaces are coming back here. Like, what does this path actually look like? And I think this is getting close to the point where I figured out what the problem was. And I'm hitting continue a few times here because this is not yet the path that I actually want. Okay, so there's a single... Right, that makes sense. And then I hit play again. And that's it. So what's the problem here? I think this might be about where the aha moment came, where, okay, if I if I'm passing in this 4-1 board coordinate, why would it be false that I'd be able to move to 3-2? So I had, in my haste, like written an incorrect test. And when I write the right test, it goes green. So it's not a problem with, the actual moves as they're being returned. That's behaving as it's expected. And then it dawns on me, the problem is here. At least I hope it dawns on me. This is kind of brutal. Sorry about this. So I think if I wasn't convinced yet by this point, I wanted to see what was happening. And then I even further got this wrong in reasoning about what the bishop should be able to do from 3-1. I think I was getting things backwards. So I look at this now, I think that I'm a moron, but that 3-1 bishop should be able to get to 2-2 and to 4-2. Boy, what was I doing? Maybe it was just being rusty and not having dealt with the bishop piece for a while. There's my dead code method again. It seems like every time I notice that, I'm red, so I can't do anything about it. But here's a spoiler. I do something about it in the next episode. Yeah, for the life of me, I'm not sure if I had figured it out yet at this point or not. Certainly I was getting close. No, I'm still going into the debugger. It was still a mystery. So this is just yet another instance where you can see that people just, no matter how long they've been at this, I mean, I'm not saying there aren't plenty of better programmers out there than me, but I've been doing this quite a while, and I still do stupid things. I've said this over and over again, but you should take note of that because it means that I've done stupid things over and over again in this series. You'll never get away from that. The thing you can take away more is that there are techniques for sort of minimizing your time spent in blind alleys. Pair programming is a big one. The short feedback loop of TDD tends to help. So I do get stuck and I do dumb things, but then I start, at least I can figure them out in relatively short order. Another thing that helps is the forced 20-minute bursts of this. And I am actually trying to be a lot better about that now. That does at times make me pause and take a break, between episodes and reconsider the design a little bit. So maybe there's a lesson in there. You should never spin your wheels for more than X amount of time. You can time box your wheel spinning. So are we at last mercifully at the point where I figured this out? I honestly do not recall. Although I do now remember what I was doing earlier. when typing that out. I hadn't gotten it right. I was trying to see if I was right about which moves it was offering up. I think that's starting to look good. No, I got to reverse them. Man, I really butchered this here, but come on, just one more. You can see it right there. It's not 2-4. Yeah, anyway, I do get it. There's only a minute or so left in this episode, so I decided to get this green and then leave off in the middle, let Trello mark where I was at, and pick up getting the bishops feature implemented in the next episode. So stay tuned for that. What I'm going to do is just my Trello housekeeping, and then I'm going to commit this to GitHub and call it an episode here. So there was some production. I mean, we've got acceptance tests here for Bishop, but more to do next time. We got to finish that up. So I will see you then.